If you guys saw my Christmas videos of 2019, the first video of that year was the Christmas Chronicles, a film that came out in 2018 that I've watched when it was streaming on Netflix back in 2018. 2 years later, in 2020, a sequel came out called The Christmas Chronicles Part 2, and after watching the sequel, I have to admit, I thought it was just going to be a rehash, mainly the fact that I saw one clip of Santa Claus singing, which is similar to the last film, but upon watching the entire film, it really shows that the people behind this movie never took the consideration on rehashing every single element from the last film. I have to say that this film is just as good as the last film, for mainly the introduction of new characters and the plot itself, because if you really thought that the last film was about saving Christmas by helping out Santa Claus, then this is basically saving the North Pole. If you think I'm exaggerating, the antagonist that you're seeing on screen was actually an elf who turned into a human, which is the thing that he despises, because he was extremely naughty in not getting the respect from Santa Claus. Granted, you've probably seen this plot many times in the past, but in all honesty, the way I see it, I honestly thought that this character, when I first saw the trailer a long time ago, was going to be one of the main protagonists of this film. Anyway, I need to fill in on anyone who hasn't watched the first film yet, and that's Kate. You see, Kate was the one who believed in Santa, while Teddy thought otherwise until he met Santa in the last film. So, in the sequel, Kate, who actually believes in Santa, isn't having the best time during the Christmas holiday, not because of the location that she's in, because there's no snow and whatnot. It's the fact that her mother is being married to another person, and believe it or not, this led to her running away because she can't be able to handle the changes. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, for anyone who say that Kate was slightly being childish in this compared to how she was in the last film, may not understand that her parents, mainly her mother, didn't get attention from the last film, and regardless if in this film, her mother and Jack's father aren't gaining much attention in this film, it's mostly about family, while the last film wasn't really about family. It was just mostly a Christmas journey with Santa Claus at most. So, I honestly felt like that the message involving family in this isn't anything new that we've seen that we've always seen in the past, but for how it's executed with Kate just trying to save the North Pole, along with Jack just trying to do something that no one has ever done, mainly saving the North Pole, goes to show that nobody is going to believe Kate or Jack other than their families. In all honesty, when I reviewed the first film 3 years ago, I was mostly praising Kurt Russell's performance as Santa Claus, since that we get to see another actor playing Santa Claus in a different kind of Christmas movie, but in the sequel, well, he's doing with one of the elves that turned into a human, all the while just trying everything to protect the North Pole from canceling Christmas forever, then I can guarantee you that this film took so many risks by trying to make the North Pole integral, especially when it comes to family. Belznickel, who is willing to steal the star from the North Pole, officially canceling Christmas and erasing Santa Claus from existence, if that's how things work in this universe, goes to show that he really felt like that he didn't feel appreciative when it comes to making the gifts that he made in the North Pole. And believe me when I say this, is that when the North Pole is mainly the elves just completely making gifts, you pretty much knew that the North Pole is always like that. But considering that the elves are smaller and Belsnickel was used to be an elf, but now turned into a human. They're really trying hard to make this elf thing that they established from the previous film a lot more important, because elves, regardless if they're somewhat humans, they're not humans in these films whatsoever. And the way that Belsnickel is portrayed as an elf and being dressed completely different compared to the other elves, I'm starting to convince that the other elves just don't know the difference of wearing something completely naughty, or the fact that these are new elves that in previous elves they just witness naughty elves, but they can't be able to talk down to the children elves so that they can carry on protecting the North Pole on Christmas. But I'm thinking way too much into it. Bottom line is that the elves aren't smart and they speak in different languages similar to the previous film. Mainly a Christmas language, but if I actually saw other Christmas films that had a Christmas language all on their own, I can guarantee you that Netflix pretty much watch nearly every single Christmas film if there were Christmas language in it. Possibly horror movies if you want to include that, but for how that they gave the elves Christmas language really shows that they just don't know what life is when it comes to humans outside of the North Pole. Bottom line is, Belsnickel, who is still an inventor, which explains all the gadgets and weapons that he has, isn't really like a human. I mean, granted, he is an elf in a human's body, but the way it's executed, it just really goes to show that they managed to make an antagonist really memorable by having him being turned into a human, which is the thing that he really despises. And the way that this film is executed for how he's just trying to ruin Christmas for basically everyone, especially for Santa, you can really tell that the backstory that he had really gave him the motivation. I mean, you can make the argument that he was being a little too arrogant, but considering that Belsnickel and Santa are mostly close with each other, but with different point of views, really proves to me that the reason why that he can't be able to stand the kids is because he thinks that Santa cares more about them than Belsnickel, which, for me personally, for being an inventor, there's always need to be some kind of respect. I mean, granted, the other elves do need some respect and recognition from Santa Claus, but if I'm gonna be real with you, if I did watch every single Christmas film involving elves helping out Santa, and there's at least one elf who is completely arrogant, then it will probably be a nightmare to make every single elf have the recognition it deserves before they turn into humans, which is the thing that they despise, similar to Belsnickel. If you ask me, I think it really shows that no other film involving elves has ever done this before, especially the elf movie that I reviewed last year. I mean, granted, it was a different plot entirely, but looking at this film, all I can say is that it's difficult to give recognition on so many elves, especially with some of the elves that helped you out the most, but believe it or not, I can guarantee you that Belsnickel is just basically a human, and he just didn't know what a human felt like, to the point that children who open presents in Christmas morning feels when they don't even know what it's like on being an elf. Then again, I'm looking way too into the whole elves in this entire film, knowing full well of how they were portrayed in the previous film. The North Pole itself, regardless if it's not as visually appealing, considering that this is a next Netflix streaming film than a theatrical film. Granted, it was in theaters, but not completely. It really looks like something that you would expect involving the North Pole, and I actually felt like that this place felt a lot more tolerable for an elf's perspective, but for a human's perspective, I can guarantee you that Kate and Jack really felt like the first children in the entire planet that ever visit the North Pole, if that was actually the case. Especially the elves when they're programming video games before they sent them out to the world for the children to play, even though that they're going to have questions on how those games came from and how they were made, especially raising more questions once they get older, but movie logic is still a thing in these types of movies, Christmas related or not. When it comes to the North Pole losing the Christmas spirit and magic, Belsnickel also used this spew smoke that made every elf in the entire village completely naughty in order to take advantage of his plan. For me personally, the fact that no other film has done this before and we get to see the North Pole turn into chaos is honestly astounding because of the fact that we can actually see how humorous the elves are by not making them too naughty. I mean, the fact that Kate and Jack need to save the North Pole while also dealing with naughty elves due to the blue smoke or something, then I'm pretty sure that there's always an opportunity for the antagonist to get the upper hand by having one of the protagonists feel handicapped. Granted, this happened in other shows, especially during the Christmas season, but when it came to the North Pole, then this is pretty much the only time you're ever going to see the characters being handicapped by elves, who turned to the nice side. Anyway, after Belsnickel got the star from the main characters, he also used a time-traveling invention that forces Santa and Kate back in Boston of 1990. I'm not even kidding. For me personally, the fact that time travel is being used in this film, and it's only being used to force the characters back in the 1990s and back, I honestly thought that that sequence was going to take forever. But this is just basically the Santa being in jail portion of the film, and since I've stated that, we get a song sequence just like the last films. And it's not as good as the last film, but for me personally, it's still decent considering that this, just like the last film, is important because Santa needs holiday cheer from everyone around him, otherwise he won't be able to go back to the North Pole or back to the original timeline. If you really think that most of these songs are mostly pointless, then you really did not witness the efforts that was put in when it comes to this version of Santa Claus. Now yes, I am fully aware that in other media, well, songs are way more integral than this song, especially the last film song, but at the same time, it just gave me a good impression of the fact that this film that rehashes elements from the predecessor still executes them a lot more better, even though that there are similarities around the way. Like, the difference is that Santa isn't in jail, and around him is the airport station in the 1990s. And considering that the only reason why all the plane flights have been cancelled is because of the weather itself. And the fact that Santa completely eliminated the weather goes to show that this, when it comes to stakes, is much more better compared to the last film. Granted, I didn't see that film a lot when it comes to how it holds up right now, but after watching this film, I can guarantee you that this is much more better compared to the last film, mainly for how it's executed. I mean, the song is better in the last film, but when it comes to everything else, it can't be able to top of what Santa did by eliminate the weather, allowing so many people to go celebrate their Christmas in their destinations. And during this sequence, we get to see Doug, who is actually the father of Kate. If you ask me, this is honestly makes this a lot more memorable than it should be, knowing full well that we can actually see a lone child who meets another child who is actually the father, and I cannot believe that they actually had the decency to make this a lot more heartwarming compared to the last film where the characters need to break Santa out. Granted, the police officers didn't know that Santa was real, but in all honesty, the fact that this film's execution is a lot more different and the plot is completely different aside from the similarities goes to show that this film was way ahead even during the pandemic. I mean, granted, the filming may have started before the pandemic took full effect, but this film coming out at the end of 2020 somewhat lifted everyone else's Christmas spirits even during the pandemic of 2020. I gotta say, 2020 wasn't really a good year, especially when it comes to Christmas, but I can say that this film somewhat lightened up everyone else's mood when they were forced to stay at home 2 years ago. Let's get into one of the new characters in this film, Jack. And just to point this out, this is the same actor who played Clyde from A Loud House Christmas, a few episodes in Season 6, I think, and, of course, a live-action series. I'm starting to convince that these actors are becoming much more noticeable the more I see their faces in these types of films. If I'm gonna be honest, if Teddy was in this film, then I'm pretty sure they didn't know what to do with him, knowing full well that he is fully aware that Santa exists along with the elves and Santa's wife, so having a different character by handling the role as the younger child, which won't work for Kate's character since that she got older, it goes to show that they really knew how to make Jack completely likable, because Mrs. Claus gave Jack 2 gingerbreads of a snowman and a regular gingerbread. He ate the snowman that involved courage, but it didn't work, while the other gingerbread, where we throw it, it's a bomb. If you really think about it, it really feels like that they want to let you notice the details in these films in order to understand that they want to give Jack development, if that he's going to return in the 3rd Christmas Chronicles, if it is going to happen, knowing full well that Kurt Russell is really into the ideal. My point is that Jack in this character really does a lot more compared to Kate and Santa, who travel back in time. I mean, it's really impressive to think that these child actors are getting better. Like, in teen sitcoms, especially the ones that there were so many on Disney Channel, I didn't have hopes for them. I mean, granted, there were a few exceptions that didn't succeed, but when it comes to everyone else, it goes to show that they did do something in the industry, and just by watching Jack's actor in this really shows to why that he handled Clyde's character in the Loud House's live-action series in the film. And regardless of how bad those are, you can't deny that Jack's actor was having a blast by being in character. My point is that these actors are getting more noticed as we see the other material that they've done in other shows. Like, the more I look at this, the more I realize that child actors are mostly all over the place compared to adult actors. I mean, granted, you can make the argument that they're noticeable when it comes to anime films, but it's mostly them voicing the characters while the actors themselves don't appear in front of camera. I mean, granted, I could be wrong since I do not watch a lot of live-action films, but at the same time, with films like this, it goes to show that I'm noticing more and more from these child actors. When it comes to Kate being 2 years older than her appearance from the last film, I really felt like that they're trying to give her a much more different and serious role when it comes to her relationship with Santa. Considering that in the last film, he was with her brother most of the time, and with her being in the North Pole along with Jack, it really shows that she's seen a lot more since that she has a passion of believing in things that no one else believes. And the way I see it, it really sums up onto why that during her trip back in Boston 1990, her maturity improves when he gave the cashier money only for the cashier to realize that it was 2020 money. Believe me when I say this, the effort that was put into this film, mainly from Kate's character, really shows. Like, if Teddy was taking the role of Kate, then I'm pretty sure that he would probably say something completely different. While Kate, who believes in things, and it took a while for Teddy to do that in the last film, would probably have magical abilities just like Santa, if there is going to be a third film. Granted, I'm not sure what I'm saying is completely true when it comes to Netflix making a third Christmas Chronicles, but considering that the ending of this film had the characters completely singing at the end, which includes Santa and Mrs. Claus, then I don't even think that a third film would be necessary if Netflix does greenlight it. Then again, I'm probably expecting more if that happens, but who knows. Overall, I enjoy this film just as much as the last film, to where that I really appreciate the changes, not to mention forgive the similarities, and the fact that the characters themselves improve over the last film, mainly Kate's character. I recommend watching the first film and the sequel if you have Netflix during the Christmas season. Believe me when I say this, these two films really do a good job by doing something Christmas related during the modern times, and regardless if classics are mostly better than this, that doesn't mean you should skip on these two films. I gave The Christmas Chronicles Part 2 an 8 out of 10.